The 12-foot-tall alien warrior aimed his plasma cannon at the human janitor. You contaminated our war cubs with your weakness. Now you die. But the 6 alien cubs did something impossible. They formed a protective wall around the small human woman, their razor-sharp claws extended not to attack, but to defend. The smallest cub, bred from birth to be a killing machine, looked up at its own father and said 2 words that shouldn't exist in their language. Mom stays. The entire starship bridge went silent. Nobody breathed. Because Vraxian cubs don't speak. They don't protect. And they definitely don't call humans mom. Just one thing before we begin. YouTube tells me 99.3% of you watching aren't subscribed. Subscribing is free. It really supports the channel and you'll get more amazing HFY SCIFI stories delivered straight to you. Don't miss out. Maria Gonzalez had been cleaning the military starship Thunderstrike for 3 years. It was boring work, mopping floors, fixing air filters, scrubbing bathroom units that dozens of alien species used. But it paid well, and she needed the money for her daughter's medical bills back on Earth. The Vraxian cubs had arrived 2 weeks ago in a reinforced steel cage. Everyone on the ship stayed far away from that cage. Vraxians were the galaxy's perfect warriors, 9 feet tall as adults, covered in armor-like skin, with claws that could cut through spaceship hulls. Even their babies were dangerous. These 6 cubs were being transported to a military training planet where they'd be turned into living weapons. Maria had been cleaning near their cage on her night shift when she heard something that made her stop. One of the cubs was crying. Not growling or snarling like everyone expected. Actually crying. "Hey there, little one," Maria had whispered, moving closer to the cage. "What's wrong?" The crying stopped. 6 pairs of glowing red eyes turned to look at her through the bars. Each cub was about the size of a large dog, with black scales and claws already 3 inches long. They should have tried to attack her through the bars. That's what the manual said they'd do. Instead, the smallest one pressed against the bars and made a soft whimpering sound. "You're lonely, aren't you?" Maria said. She'd raised 4 kids back on Earth before joining the space program. She knew that sound. It was the same sound her youngest made during thunderstorms. Against every rule, every protocol, every warning she'd been given, Maria sat down next to the cage and started talking to them. She told them about Earth, about her kids, about the funny things that happened during her shifts. The cubs listened, pressing closer to the bars. This went on for 2 weeks. Every night shift, Maria would sit with them. She started bringing her dinner to share, sliding pieces of her sandwich through the bars. The cubs would take the food gently, careful not to scratch her fingers with their claws. She taught them simple games like peekaboo and patty cake through the bars. They learned faster than any Earth child she'd known. Then came the night everything changed. Maria had just started her shift when alarms began screaming through the ship. Red lights flashed everywhere. The automated voice boomed, "Hull breach in Cargo Bay 7. Emergency protocols activated." Maria ran toward the cargo bay. That's where the cub's cage was. The hull breach had torn a hole in the wall, and air was screaming out into space. The emergency force field was holding, but it was flickering. If it failed, everything in that bay would be sucked into the vacuum, including the cubs. Their cage had been damaged by debris. The lock was broken, the door hanging open. The cubs could have run to safety. They could have escaped into the ship. Instead, all 6 of them were pressed against the corner of their cage, terrified. Maria didn't think. She ran into the cargo bay, fighting against the wind trying to pull her towards space. She reached the cubs and they immediately climbed onto her, clinging to her uniform. "It's okay, babies," she said, even though her heart was pounding. "I've got you." She carried all 6 of them, nearly 200 pounds of alien predator, to safety just as the force field failed completely. The cargo bay doors slammed shut, sealing the breach. Maria collapsed in the hallway, 6 Vraxian cubs piled on top of her, all of them shaking. That's when Security Chief Thompson found them. His face went white. "Get away from them." They'll kill you. But the cubs weren't attacking. They were nuzzling against Maria, making a sound nobody had ever heard from a Vraxian before. They were purring. "Call medical," Thompson said into his radio. And call the captain. We have a situation." Captain Rogers arrived with a full security team, weapons drawn. "Ms. Gonzalez, step away from the creatures slowly." "They're not creatures," Maria said, still sitting on the floor with cubs in her lap. "They're children. And they're scared." "Those are Vraxian war cubs," the captain said. "They don't get scared. They don't have emotions. They're bred to be weapons." The smallest cub looked up at the captain and spoke. Actually formed words in broken but clear English. "Maria saved us." Every weapon in the hallway lowered in shock. Dr. Chen, the ship's science officer, pushed through the crowd with a medical scanner. "This is impossible," she said, scanning the cubs. "They're showing emotional responses. Gratitude, affection, trust. Vraxians don't have those neural pathways." "Maybe they do," Maria said. "Maybe nobody ever gave them a reason to use them." Over the next hour, the entire ship watched through security feeds as Maria interacted with the cubs. She taught them to stack blocks from a supply crate. They worked together, helping each other, celebrating when they succeeded. She showed them how to be gentle, how to pet instead of scratch. They learned instantly, their brains absorbing information at an incredible rate. "Their intelligence is off the charts," Dr. Chen reported. "They're learning faster than our computers can track. And look at this, their stress hormones drop to almost zero when Maria talks to them." That's when the real alarm came. Long-range sensors detected 3 Vraxian battleships approaching fast. "They're here for the cubs," Captain Rogers said grimly. "And when they find out what's happened." Everyone knew what Vraxians did to defective cubs. They eliminated them. No mercy, no exceptions. High Commander Thrax appeared on the main screen 30 minutes later. He was 12 feet of pure warrior, with scars covering his black scales and teeth like swords. His red eyes burned with rage. "You have contaminated our cubs with human weakness," he growled. "Return them immediately for termination." "No." Maria stepped in front of the screen, and the cubs immediately surrounded her protectively. "They're not contaminated. They're evolved." Thrax's eyes narrowed. "You are the infection source. You will die first." That's when it happened. The smallest cub stepped forward, looked directly at the screen, and spoke in perfect Vraxian. The ship's translator kicked in a second later. "Father, Mom stays." The bridge of the Vraxian ship went silent. Commander Thrax stared at the screen, his expression frozen. "What did you call the human?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Mom," the cub said simply. "She feeds us. She plays with us. She saved us from the vacuum. She loves us. That makes her Mom." "Vraxians don't have mothers," Thrax said. "We have genetic donors. We have training instructors. We don't have moms." "We do now," another cub said, finding its voice. "Mom taught us something you never did. She taught us we have choices." Maria felt tears running down her face. These cubs, who she'd known for just 2 weeks, were standing against their entire species for her. "Show me," Thrax commanded. "Show me what the human has done to you." For the next hour, the cubs demonstrated everything Maria had taught them. They showed how they could work together instead of fighting each other. They solved puzzles that required cooperation. They shared food equally. They comforted the smallest cub when it got scared by a loud noise. But the moment that changed everything was when one of the cubs got a small cut from a sharp edge on a crate. The other 5 immediately surrounded it, not to take advantage of weakness, but to help. One pressed cloth against the wound. Another made soothing sounds. The smallest cub actually kissed the injury, something it had seen Maria do when she'd bumped her hand. They're caring for the injured, someone on Thrax's bridge said in amazement. They're showing mercy to weakness. It's not mercy, Maria said. It's love. They're family now. And family takes care of each other. Dr. Chen stepped forward with her data pad. Commander Thrax, I'm sending you our brain scans. Your cubs haven't lost anything. They've gained emotional intelligence that's made them smarter, faster, more capable than any Vraxian cubs on record. Thrax was silent for a long moment, studying the data. Around him, his bridge crew watched the cubs with expressions of confusion and wonder. This violates everything, Thrax said finally. Our entire society is built on strength through solitude. Warriors don't need others. Warriors don't feel love. But what if they could? Maria asked gently. What if your cubs could be the strongest warriors in the galaxy, not despite having emotions but because of them? They'll fight harder to protect what they love than they ever would for mere conquest. The smallest cub looked at the screen again. Father, before Mom we were empty. We existed but didn't live. Now we know joy. We know sadness. We know fear and comfort and hope. We are more than weapons now. We are people. Another long silence. Then Thrax did something nobody expected. He laughed. It was a strange sound, rusty and unused. In 10,000 years of Vraxian history, he said, no cub has ever called me father. They call me commander. They call me sir. But you called me father. Because that's what you are, the cub said. Mom taught us that parents aren't just genetic donors. They're the ones who are supposed to protect us, guide us, love us. You could be that. If you choose. Maria watched the 12-foot warrior on the screen struggle with emotions his species had suppressed for millennia. 1 month, Thrax said suddenly. The cubs stay with the human for 1 month. We will observe. If they become weak, they will be terminated. If they become strong. They're already strong, Maria said. I'm just helping them become complete. The screen went dark. The Vraxian ships took up positions around the Thunderstrike but powered down their weapons. They would watch. They would wait. Captain Rogers turned to Maria. You realize what you've done? You've just became the first human to raise alien war cubs. They're not war cubs, Maria said, looking down at the 6 young faces looking up at her with trust and love. They're just kids who needed someone to see them as more than weapons. The month that followed changed galactic history. Maria was given quarters near the cubs' new habitat, not a cage but a real room with beds and toys and windows to see the stars. She spent every moment she wasn't working with them, and soon her shifts were officially changed to interspecies child development specialist. The cubs learned at an astronomical rate. Within a week they were reading at a college level. Within 2 weeks, they were solving engineering problems that stumped the ship's computers. But more importantly, they were learning to be children. They had favorite foods. The smallest cub loved peanut butter. They had favorite games, hide and seek in the cargo bay. They had inside jokes with Maria that made them giggle, another sound Vraxians weren't supposed to be able to make. They also showed abilities nobody expected. When a fire broke out in the engine room, the cubs smelled the smoke from 3 decks away and raised the alarm before the sensors detected it. When an engineer was trapped under fallen equipment, they worked together to lift it, their emotional bond making them coordinate perfectly without speaking. They're not just smart, Dr. Chen reported. They're empathic. They can sense emotions in others and respond appropriately. That Vraxian who was injured yesterday? The cubs visited him in medical and somehow knew exactly how to comfort him, even though they'd never met him before. The Vraxian observers on the surrounding ships watched everything. At first, their reports were skeptical. But as days passed, the tone changed. The cubs weren't becoming weak. They were becoming something unprecedented, warriors with hearts. 3 weeks into the experiment, something unexpected happened. A distress call came from a nearby colony. Pirates were attacking and there were children trapped in a school. Captain Rogers was preparing a rescue team when the cubs approached him. "We want to help," the largest cub said. Its name was Tank. Maria had let them choose Earth names. "You're too young," the captain said. "We're Vraxian," Tank said. "We're bred for combat. But now we have something worth fighting for, protecting those who can't protect themselves." Maria was terrified, but she trusted them. The cubs joined the rescue mission, and what happened next was broadcast across the galaxy. 6 young Vraxians, barely out of infancy, took down an entire pirate crew without killing a single one. They used their strength to disarm, their speed to outmaneuver, and their new emotional intelligence to predict exactly what the pirates would do. But the moment that made history was when they reached the school. Dozens of alien children were huddled in a classroom, terrified. The smallest cub, Scar, as Maria called him, approached slowly and did something no Vraxian had ever done. He made himself small, getting down on their level, and spoke gently. I'm Scar. We're here to help. Our mom taught us that being strong means protecting others. You're safe now." The children, who should have been terrified of Vraxian cubs, instead ran to them for protection. They recognized something in these young warriors. They recognized love. The footage spread across every network in known space. 6 Vraxian cubs comforting scared children, carrying them to safety, even singing human lullabies. Maria had taught them to keep the children calm. High Commander Thrax himself came aboard the Thunderstrike the next day. He stood in Maria's quarters, having to duck his massive frame through the doorway, and watched his son and the other cubs playing a board game with Maria. "They laugh," he said as if he couldn't believe it. "Warriors don't laugh." "Sure they do," Maria said. "Watch this." She tickled Scar, who dissolved into giggles. "See? Still strong, still brave, but also happy. Isn't that better?" Thrax sat down on the floor, which groaned under his weight. The cubs immediately climbed on him, something no Vraxian cub had ever done with an adult. They showed him their drawings, their toys, their favorite books. "Father," Scar said, "Mom says families eat together. Will you stay for dinner?" And so the most feared warrior in the galaxy sat at a human table, eating spaghetti with 6 cubs and a human janitor, learning to twirl pasta on a fork with claws meant for battle. "I taste enjoyment," Thrax said, confused. "I didn't know food could be more than fuel." "That's because you've never had someone cook with love," Maria said, serving him seconds. After dinner, the cubs performed a play they'd written about a warrior who discovered he had a heart. It was simple, silly, full of mistakes. Thrax watched his son forget his lines and improvise badly, watched the other cubs giggle and help him, watched Maria beam with pride at their efforts. "They're happy," Thrax said quietly. "In 10,000 years, I don't think we've ever asked if our cubs were happy. Are you happy?" Maria asked him gently. The massive warrior was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know what happiness feels like." "It feels like this," Scar said, hugging his father's arm. "It feels like being together." Thrax's eyes, which had stayed dry through 1,000 battles, filled with tears. He didn't know his species could cry. "What have you done to us?" he asked Maria. "Nothing you weren't always capable of," she said. "I just showed them it was okay to feel. The same way I'm showing you." The month ended, but the experiment didn't. Thrax returned to the Vraxian homeworld with revolutionary ideas. The cubs would continue to be raised by Maria, but they would also learn traditional Vraxian skills. They would be warriors but also scholars, artists, friends. The change didn't happen overnight. There was resistance from traditional Vraxians who saw emotions as weakness. But when the cubs demonstrated their abilities, when they showed they could fight harder, think faster, and solve problems better than traditionally raised cubs, the opposition crumbled. Within a year, the Vraxian Empire established the first emotional development centers, where cubs learned both strength and compassion. Maria was invited to teach on the Vraxian homeworld, and this time she accepted, bringing her own children from Earth to grow up alongside alien cubs. The smallest change created the biggest ripples. Other warrior species saw what was happening with the Vraxians and began their own programs. Within 5 years, the galaxy's most violent species were raising children who knew how to fight but chose when not to. Wars decreased by 70%. Not because anyone became weaker but because they became wiser. It's harder to attack someone when you can empathize with their fear. It's harder to conquer when you understand the pain you'll cause. But the most beautiful change happened in the cubs Maria had raised. Scar became the youngest Vraxian ambassador in history, bridging gaps between species with his unique understanding of both strength and gentleness. Tank became a rescue specialist, using his strength to save lives in disasters across the galaxy. The others became teachers, doctors, engineers, careers that hadn't existed in Vraxian society before because they required caring about others. Every year, on the anniversary of the day Maria had sat by their cage and talked to them, all 6 cubs returned to the Thunderstrike. They were full-grown now, 9 feet tall and powerful, but they still called her Mom. They still played the game she'd taught them. They still ate her spaghetti and helped her clean up after. "Do you know what you did?" Scar asked her one year when Maria's hair had started turning gray. "You saved our entire species from ourselves." "I just saw scared kids who needed love," Maria said, having to reach up to pat his scaled head. "Any mom would have done the same." "No," Thrax said. He visited often now, this legendary warrior who had learned to hug, to laugh, to cry. No one else saw children. They saw weapons. "You saw what we could become, not what we were made to be." Maria looked around the room at her strange, wonderful family. 6 alien warriors who could destroy ships with their bare hands but who still asked her to check under the bed for monsters when they visited. A 12-foot commander who had learned to braid her hair with claws meant for killing. Her own human children, who had grown up thinking it was perfectly normal to have Vraxian brothers who sometimes shed their scales on the carpet. "Love is evolution," she said simply. "It's how we become more than our programming." The transformation of the Vraxian Empire became required study at every military academy in the galaxy. How one human janitor had revolutionized the most warrior-based society in history just by treating their cubs like children instead of weapons. But Maria knew the truth was even simpler. Every child, no matter their species, no matter what they were bred for, no matter how many claws or teeth they had, needed the same things: safety, food, play, learning, and most importantly, love. She hadn't given the cubs anything they didn't already have inside them. She'd just shown them it was there, waiting to be awakened. 10 years after that first night when she'd heard crying from a cage, Maria stood before the Galactic Council receiving the Peace Prize. She wore her old janitor uniform because, as she said, "That's who I was when this started. That's who I'll always be." The 6 cubs, now massive warriors decorated with medals from across the galaxy, stood as her honor guard. But when the ceremony ended, they did what they always did. They hugged their mom, careful not to squeeze too hard with their incredible strength. "Ready for dinner?" Maria asked. "I made your favorite." "Spaghetti night." They cheered in voices that could command armies but turned soft for the woman who had saved them. As they walked to the ship's mess hall, other beings stepped aside in respect. Not fear but respect. These were the Vraxian 6, the cubs who had changed the galaxy. But to Maria, they were just her kids who still needed reminding to use napkins and not to roughhouse indoors. That night, as every night when they were together, Maria tucked them in. It was absurd 9-foot warriors being tucked into beds too small for them, but tradition was tradition. Tell us the story, Scar asked like he always did. Which one? Maria asked though she knew. The one about the night you found us. So Maria told them about hearing crying from a cage, about sitting in a hallway sharing her sandwich with monsters that weren't monsters at all, about choosing to see children where everyone else saw weapons. And then what happened? Tank asked though he knew. And then you chose to love me back, Maria said. And that choice changed everything. They fell asleep like they had that first night after the hull breach, piled together, feeling safe, feeling loved, feeling like the family they'd chosen to become. Outside the window, stars wheeled by in the infinite darkness of space. Somewhere out there, on 100 worlds, Vraxian cubs were learning to paint, to sing, to laugh. They were learning that strength wasn't about standing alone but about having someone worth standing with. All because a janitor named Maria Gonzalez had heard crying and chose to answer it with kindness. The alarm had screamed that night about escaped war cubs. Everyone had run away in terror. But Maria had walked toward the cage with her dinner and her stories and her radical belief that every child deserved love. The cubs had been labeled as weapons, transported in darkness, destined for violence and solitude. Instead they'd found light. They'd found laughter. They'd found the one thing no one thought Vraxians could have, a mom. And in finding her they'd found themselves. Not as the weapons they were made to be, but as the people they chose to become. Love really was evolution. And evolution, it turned out, could start with something as simple as a shared sandwich and a gentle voice saying, "Hey there, little one. What's wrong?" The galaxy had learned that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't plasma cannons or battleships or genetically engineered warriors. It was a mom's love, given freely to children who'd never known they needed it until they received it. And once they received it, they changed the universe itself, one hug at a time.